Hi there, everyone. Hope you had a good week. This is going to be chapter one of the bit economic theory. Um, this chapter is called the bit cycle, which is comprised by information, knowledge, and wisdom. There is information in everything. One might even argue that information is everything. But although the previous statement might be debatable, it's necessary to accept that there is information to be found everywhere and in everything. If someone look hard enough or even use any other sense, it's possible to find new information independent of the perspective being towards the micro or the macro picture. However, this depends on the individual and what one perceives of being of interest to oneself. By doing so, the individual is improving on its own knowledge, and by discarding everything else, it focuses the new added information in the patterns and categories that has been acquiring throughout one's life. The way human beings build knowledge is intrinsically connected to individual interests, desires, and necessities. But wisdom, which is the application and exposition of that knowledge, is intrinsically connected to others. Only through others can wisdom be perceived. And for this reason, the ultimate value of information is, after being processed, experimented, and ultimately fitted into an understandable pattern for others to reach it, um, it can be evaluated and measured in accordance to the surrounding and understanding and overall usefulness. So basically, there is information, and if we find this information and we accumulate it, we will build up knowledge, and by building it, we can start to uh, spread that knowledge. And once we do that, it becomes wisdom. And with more wisdom, it's easier to find more information. This is only a very simplistic understanding of how this circle works. However, the simplification of it allows a stronger understanding regarding the exponential growth that can be attached to information. By identifying this exponential growth as invariably infinite, as long as there are humans to perceive it, and string it towards an individual growth, it's easy to attach to it the human value, and by doing so, it is possible to solve one of the first problems of the current system, shifting the finite resource space, like coal and oil, or other mineral resources that supports the global economies, into infinite resource space, which is the information generated individually and accumulated by everyone, and in doing so, shifting also the value from commodities exploration to human nature itself. Furthermore, one of the fundamentals of capitalism, which is competition promotes development, falls flat when the industry of energy, for example, which controls global production of energy, monopolizes the way and how energy is produced, being inflexible to change. In a way, there should exist competition, except if that competition disrupts the market in which the economic structure is built upon, which is the energy market. This is especially proponent in the ways and setbacks that other energy gatherers and systems were disrupted and muffled until recently, when the climate crisis became more prescient. So, the current system regards energy as the fundamental resource of economic development, and this regards all the other necessities that individuals might endure, such as health, food, and basic resources, housing, and other fundamental human needs. This is such that even though energy is placed in such important place in what regards with the economic development, since the need of it is continually growing, Health, for instance, which is a necessity that has a need in growth also, is seen as something outside of the economical system, in such a way that it does not produce economic value. For this reason, changing the economical basis from mineral resources exploration towards the information generated by individual becomes easier to assign value to saving any human life, for example, since any human represents a recipient for information. Roughly stating, if there are no people or many people have died, there is no economy, or any system for that matter. Also, it's necessary to contextualize the notion of basic need, being this a resource or equity that a group of individuals identifies of being of most importance and essential to guarantee life, prioritizing this over many other resources. It's also useful to understand that this kind of resource can be localized or streamed to specific infrastructures, but are nonetheless priorities to allow the support of living systems. And if many individuals identify the same resources as of being considered basic needs, this allows to evaluate and regulate it in the global scale, in such a way that does become global needs, and for that matter of general interest. However, despite of existing many needs that can automatically be understood of being global, the reason why information can be allocated in a different standard is because it is the only resource that can be produced by everyone at any given time, making it abundant and always needed. Also, it can be measured and it can produce factual data about almost anything needed. And lastly, it can be stored regarding the proper infrastructures. These properties make it a resource like no other to sustain any economic structure. Finally, because it's ever growing, it's risk adverse. One of the issues regarding the bit economy theory system is about the interrelation between individuals and information. Information is something that exists, independent of individuals. However, it can only be perceived, studied, analyzed, or used by specific individuals with a specific built in knowledge and truthful interest. If that doesn't exist, it's possible that some new information can pass by without being noticed. However, and if we take into consideration individual tribes, needs and interests and desires, information is not stagnant and it can be taught, learned, and shared, allowing others to build the knowledge needed to achieve the same information and probably more. This understanding correlates with the exposition of that knowledge based upon new information, which can be translated into wisdom. Although information and knowledge are the basis of this economic system, since the objective is to amass and store the maximum of these two um, uh, in order to produce inherent value, generating long-term stability. Wisdom, in the other hand, and because it's directly connected with others than the individual, generate a different kind of value. So it's two wheels, one to amount the individual information and the other to enrich others, which in fact is enrich it's the valuable uh, the the biggest valuable point for the individual, but I will get into that later. And because is directly this value relates to the amount of people that find the wisdom transmitted useful and ultimately needed and should be attached directly towards the groups that the individual identifies as being a part of. This kind of exposition will invariably improve the influence of individual inside of the group that he himself identifies with, but the group's understanding and information basis also grows. And that growth can be perceived directly from other groups, which will have the need to reach out in order to improve and develop the same amount of value. The assimilation of new information by the groups adds value to the individual, which in turn can create in the individual the will to produce more useful information for the groups that he is a part of, and ultimately humanity. This concept is currently being used to identify the growth of corporations. However, it does not translate to factual development, but in fact correlates with something less based in reality, which is the financial profits, many times attributed to the head of these corporations, disregarding the real and factual input of any other contributors to the growth of the company. The sense of growth transmitted to the markets through financial profits is one of the causes of inflation and speculation. So the sense of growth transmitted to the markets through financial profits makes inflation and speculation. And we saw this during this last COVID crisis, during the pandemic, that became standard in the current model and erode the system from within, and ultimately create mistrust from the general public towards companies and the economical structure in itself. Furthermore, since corporations tend to have a linear pyramidal structure, it creates a sense of competition that, even though can be interesting to explore sometimes, ultimately prevents chains of cooperation and trust building. By implementing a different kind of economical structure in which any individual is identified as being of integral and fundamental for the development of any structure, there is the possibility to dilute the central chain of commander and at the same time I incentivize individuals to produce more and towards common goals. Also, it allows groups to grow and to experiment with other successful growth strategies put forward by the competitors, which will in turn become co-operators. Furthermore, making possible to shift financial goals towards development goals in such a way that instead of creating a fictitious value like financial profitability, it is that can be inflated, it is connected towards the amount of growth of all the information output of all the individuals directly connected to those enterprises put together. Also, it is necessary to refer that in many ways the notion of supply and demand is no longer the primary drive of the actual economic system, at least not entirely, as many companies achieve a global status, and since the notion of profitability is one of their primary goals, which in certain way can be translated into power, it's easy for them to forget its useful purpose towards individuals, and for that matter, making decisions that harm some in favor of financial margins. At the same time, the fact that there is no system at the global level to prevent and secure and regulate it creates a gap of action that can be exploited, and it usually is by the corporations. In many ways, it's possible to see that the chains of supply have been shifted in such a way that it no longer takes into consideration the demand, and in many cases, creating the demand through manipulation and unnecessary inputs in the overall conscience of the society. This fact is so deeply rooted that somehow is acceptable to disregard production and even the localization in favor of financial margins. However, this lacks some common sense in what is regarded both the consumer and local productivity, and if we go deeper, the basic interests of individuals. One way to better understand this can be explained with the industry of plastic. This industry is one that it no longer takes into consideration the demand in such a way that is completely global and regards itself solely on supply chain, washing it in almost everything and everywhere. Although plastics came to generate some needed development. Today, the issue regarding its pollution is global, and because the regulating systems are not connected, which in turn makes the confrontation between individuals and their groups and these global companies impossible to tackle, creating an imbalance. So, this is the end of part one of the chapter one of the bit economy cycle. Next week, I will continue, and I hope you have a good week and see you next Sunday. Bye, everyone.